Whenever we think of Cataclysm, there's always a handful of the same things that get mentioned in a negative light. Content drought, raid finder, butchering of the old world, dragon soul sucked, 5-man heroics were too hard, among other things. Now, some of this is true. The 5-man heroics in their pre-nerf state were actually very difficult, and they made you have to play your class properly, so things would need to be interrupted. Mechanics couldn't just flat out be ignored. And when they reintroduced Zolaman and Zul'Gurub as 5-man heroics, they were like mini raids. They genuinely were very difficult. But the thing is, once you get a bit of gear, you do start to be able to ignore mechanics, and eventually they do become a lot easier. It's just when you're freshly dinged at level 85 and you're going in to try and gear up, where you just need to play properly. Now, some things like the shattering of the world, which people don't like, okay, maybe it can't be changed, because the whole quest system would need changing as well. If you're not aware, when Cataclysm comes out, the questing is very linear. You could compare it to the likes of Outland and Northrend. So there's not constant zone hopping. You just pick where you want to go, pick up a few quests, and then you're just going backwards and forwards handing in. I must admit, I do actually prefer the questing in Cataclysm than I do even Wrath, and mainly because I like Northrend and I even like Outland, but it is the old world where if you're a classic era player, you might like the fact that you have to jump between zones. So you'll go and do a little bit of Westfall, they'll get a little bit too high, you go to Redbridge, they get too high, you move to Duskwood, and then you go back and finish them off sort of as you gain some levels. In Cataclysm, it's not like that at all. Now, we have seen that Blizzard are not only open to change in Classic nowadays, they actively seek out ways of implementing changes to make the experience a better one. Without compiling an exhaustive list, we have seen the introduction of Titan Rune dungeons, which, in my opinion, have actually been received really well. A Sons of Hodir tabard, glyphs added to specs like Feral Druids and Paladins, new systems brought forward from future expansions like the Collections tab where we keep all our pets, mounts, toys and heirlooms all in one place and account-wide, and just overall there isn't any change that Blizzard have made to Wrath so far that I personally would class as a mistake or a misstep. Of course you can't please everyone, and there will be Wrath of the Lich King purists who hate all of these things added and just wanted the expansion exactly how it was historically. Me personally, I've said all along that Blizzard should be using it as a second chance to look at the things that didn't quite work back in, the original time of the game, and then make sensible changes or add some of these catch-up mechanics, even though Iron Rune Dungeons is one that I wouldn't have added, and we will get into why very soon. Before we carry on, if you're not subscribed to the channel and you watch my videos regularly, hit subscribe because there's going to be plenty more Cataclysm related content coming out as we inevitably get closer to the release, and obviously with BlizzCon coming soon, expect a very big speculation video coming with a bit of humour in the next few days. And all those people scrolling down below, thank you for joining the channel as a member. I am going to be putting out quite a lot of members only videos over the next sort of 3 to 4 months, where they will eventually be sort of available to everybody, but if you join, you're going to get to see them first, so consider clicking that join button. So anyway, we know that we're not working with a classic experience where it's exactly the same as it was before. We know those days are numbered, so we either accept it and move on, or don't accept it and move on to play something else. So thinking about some of the negatives with Cataclysm, what could Blizzard do to make it a success the second time round? Of course, we can't fix all the problems, but we can definitely fix a few things. Firstly, on my list of 5 things that we could change, Raid Finder. I feel like this is going to be a big elephant in the room, and probably for the wrong reasons. And I say the wrong reasons because Raid Finder is actually one that I don't mind being in the game. I just don't think it should be in the game as it was in original Cataclysm. If you hear people complaining about Raid Finder all the time and saying, oh, it should not come out in Classic Cata, you might wonder why people are so against it. Now, when you're raiding and you're doing either normal bosses or even heroic bosses, you control the situation. You're raiding with people that you want to raid with, and you're putting your time in where you've got the time to start progressing on these bosses and get them down. The thing is with Raid Finder is it's very easy, and the bosses do generally just fall over because a lot of the mechanics don't matter at all. But it will be with people freshly dinged in absolutely terrible gear, people who are just sat watching telly at the same time as while they're playing, and it's typically just not a very enjoyable experience when you're raiding with 24 people that you don't really want to be raiding with, but you're feeling forced to. And that's the change I'd like to see. Raid Finder's great to be in the game because what I actually enjoy doing myself when it comes to Raid Finder is getting really stacked out in gear, and when I'm bored and I've got nothing else to do, I'll queue for Raid Finder just to go and smash meters and flex. Don't judge me, you'll be doing the same thing. But with how Raid Finder works, it's almost mandatory to do it every week for certain classes, if not all classes. And the reason for this is, if we look at 25-man normal loot, is 397 eye level. Now, for the majority of these items, it might be a little bit irrelevant, but when you start looking at some of the big trinkets that people are going to want, for example, Indomitable Pride, it's got a big amount of stamina on for your tanks, and when attacks reduce you below 50%, you get an absorb shield equal to 50% of the damage done by that attack for 6 seconds. Now, we could take any of these trinkets as an example from any of the bosses. And a good example would be something like Wrath of Unchaining, where it's a stack in 88 agility, 10 times, so it's 880 agility, basically on 100% of the time. This one's 403 eye level. If you get it on heroic, it's going to go up to 416 eye level. It's still 390 eye level, giving 78 agility each stack, so 780 in total. Now, like you can see, the difference between the normal being 403 going down to 390 for Raid Finder is not actually that big of a jump in gear. So some of these big items that like you're going to either be waiting a while, maybe because like you're bottom of the prio on that item or whatever, or even just as an upgrade on an ult or whatever before you get the normal or the heroic version, you're going to feel almost forced to do Raid Finder to try and get some of these items to tide you over until you get the normal or the heroic version. That's the bit I don't like. Raid Finder should have just a completely different set of gear. It shouldn't be exactly the same as the normal and the heroic items, but just at a lower gear score, because it is going to make you feel like you need to go in and try and get some of these items, rather than Raid Finder being what it should be, and it's just a way for people who haven't got much gear to be able to go in and experience the content. You know, go and see the content, learn the basics of the fight, not feel like, oh, I'm fully raid geared, I raid every week, we're pushing heroic bosses, I still need to queue every week to go and do Raid Finder to give myself a chance at getting that trinket. So what's the fix, you might say? I think it's fairly simple. The loot table should not be the same as normal and heroic. You shouldn't be able to get trinkets, you shouldn't be able to even get weapons really, in my opinion, and you definitely shouldn't be able to get tier, because even though I fixated on trinkets, obviously being able to go into Raid Finder to be able to get your 4 set bonuses quicker, which are obviously going to be huge amounts of damage, should just be stripped out. So keep all the other bits like random chest armors, cloaks, legs, rings, all that sort of thing. You could keep all that in there. Remove tier tokens, remove trinkets, and potentially remove weapons. Because let's be honest, Blizzard are not going to go through all of these bosses and then start adding different loot. They're just going to pretty much leave it as it is. So the only option for me, which would be easy for Blizzard, is just to remove some of these big items where you're going to feel forced like you need to go in every week. The next change I want to talk about is quite an obvious one. Content drought. Now, that's not going to exist anyway because of the accelerated progression through the phases that we get when we're playing Classic. But if we're talking about one of the things that need fixing, one of the biggest complaints about Dragon Soul, even from people who don't remember it properly, is always how long we was physically sat doing Dragon Soul. Dragon Soul is only an 8-boss raid, and some of these bosses are extremely quick. And the last boss, Madness of Deathwing, is incredibly badly designed, so it's not somewhere we're going to want to spend that amount of time. It was out for around 9 months originally, which we know we're never going to see it for 9 months. But the biggest thing about Cataclysm is actually as you go through the phases, there really isn't that much content. Back in the day when Blizzard was actually developing Cataclysm, a lot of the time went into doing stuff that they'd already done, which sounds crazy, but that's exactly what happened. Restructuring the old world, changing all the old quests, recycling content like Zul'Gurub, Zolaman, and even Dragon Souls, mostly reskinned and recycled. Adding a profession like archaeology meant that needed a lot of work even in the old world zones like Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor. So just a hell of a lot of work went into the content that we've already got, which meant the actual amount of new content we got was not that much. Because we would have Phase 1 looking like Blackwing Descent, Throne of the Four Winds, and Bastion of Twilight, all of which are fantastic raids and possibly one of the best opening tiers in the history of WoW, and I genuinely mean that. These 3 raids, well, not Throne of the Four Winds, forget that, but Bastion of Twilight and Blackwing Descent, fantastic bosses, like every single one of them. And obviously getting to do Nefarian with Onyxia and all of that in Blackwing Descent is pretty awesome. But even saying that, they're all fairly short raids, so we don't want to be stuck in them for too long. But then the next content patch hasn't even got a raid. It's just going to be literally Zul'Gurub and Zolaman, and that definitely could just be brought in at the same time as launching Firelands. And then finally, the last raid is Dragon Soul. So you're really only getting 3 meaningful phases of gear, and as I say, because Zul'Gurub and Zolaman is pretty much just for catch-up gear, that could be chucked in at the same time as Firelands launches. So if you was to think of it as a 3-phase expansion, Cataclysm Classic genuinely could be over and done with in a year, which I think would be a sensible amount of time for Cataclysm to actually be out. Now, we know we're waiting another couple of weeks until this is actually confirmed by Blizzard at BlizzCon, but I don't see them going any other route. Sure, there's going to be new stuff for Classic era, as in a new seasonal server, which sits on that 1.15 patch that we know has been sat around being worked on for many months now. I think Cataclysm is fairly set in stone. If it doesn't get announced, I'll eat this hat Don't make me do it, Blizz. But overall, as an issue, content drought still does need to be addressed by Blizzard. Yes, we know it's going to move faster, but I think it needs to move faster than maybe even you expect Blizzard to move. And as I say, when you break it down and really think that there's only 3 phases of raids, it makes sense that it's got to be a fairly short expansion. The next one, and I would say quite a big one, is the way the raid lockouts work. Now, if you're not aware, the raid lockouts change completely from how they are at the moment in Wrath of the Lich King. So at the moment, you can do 10-man, you can do 25-man, and obviously you can do each of those difficulties on Heroic. You can only do a single 10-man clear and a single 25-man clear, and you can change on a boss-by-boss basis which ones you're going to do on Heroic. But the reason for this is because the loot tables are completely different. So if you go into 10-man ICC, you know you can't get anything that's the same as in 25-man ICC, except for tier tokens if you was doing ICC 10 Heroic. Whereas with Cataclysm, 10-man and 25-man normal drop the same loot. 10-man Heroic and 25 Heroic also drop the same loot. So you can actually only do 1 raid size a week. So if you fall clear on 25-man, all of tier 11 when it launches, you won't be able to do 10-man on the same character. Obvious solution? Just let you do it on both sizes. I don't think we should be locked down to only be able to do 1 raid size. You can go from 25 to 10, by the way, but only with normal. If you do Heroic, then you're going to be locked for that ID. If you cleared the first few bosses on 25 normal, and then for some reason you had to leave or you DC'd, you could then go and finish the other few bosses at the end of the raid that you haven't finished on 10-man. Again, you can only flex between 25 and 10 on normal, and you can only ever go forwards. You can't go back. So what I mean is, if you kill the first boss on 25-man, that doesn't mean you can then go and do 10-man and kill the first boss again to then carry on. You need to obviously join a group that's already at the second boss. Already. I felt like I said already really weird. I don't know. So you might be thinking, well, that's mental because everyone's going to gear up so fast if you let them do both 10 and 25-man. But like I said, and tying in nicely to the content drought point where we've only got 3 tiers of content, it kind of makes sense to actually allow us to get that gear that much quicker, to move through the phases that little bit faster. This also does mean that you get to do both raid difficulties on the same character, which is huge because there are big differences between 10 and 25-man in terms of difficulty, where some bosses are a lot easier on 25, some are a lot easier on 10, and ultimately if you've got your main that you want to get geared up on, not being able to do those like Friday night 10-man runs with the boys on Discord having a few beers is actually going to hurt the game in a lot of ways. So easy fix to this is just remove the restriction of only being able to do one or the other. Stick with the same system that we've got now in Wrath of the Lich King, where you can do both 10 and 25-man, obviously only once a week. Point number 4 might seem like a really obvious one, but I feel like we need to talk about it anyway, because if I don't mention it and Blizzard don't change it, it would be pretty mental. And what I'm talking about is undoing what they've already done. Now again, I know this may seem obvious to some people, but yes, they've been open to change and that's been great. They've gave Ferals the Omen of Clarity glyph, they've gave Rep Paladins the Hand of Reckoning glyph, but these will have to be removed from the game. Now the glyph system goes through quite big changes anyway if you're not aware, because we get the addition of Prime glyphs. So whilst I don't think it's much of a concern, and again a very quick point to cover because they probably would just naturally get removed when they start working or implementing the new glyph system, I thought it was worth mentioning, because Ferals and Rets both do very good damage in Cataclysm, and they certainly don't need the help of a glyph. And now my final change is a really weird one, because no, it's not really relevant to Cataclysm, and by that I mean it's not actually Cataclysm specific content, but it's something I'm worried that they're going to carry on through the expansion, and that is Titan Rune Dungeons. I said at the start that we would get onto this soon, now's the time. Titan Rune Dungeons are great, and it's awesome that you can go and get catch-up gear. I've used it myself, I've used it for off-spec, even on my main to go and get things like Death's Choice on my Holy Paladin, but ultimately it's not needed. All of the raids actually stay really relevant throughout the expansion. Of course, when Dragon Soul comes out, Tier 11 is probably not going to get looked at that much. Even when Firelands is out, you'll probably still find yourself doing Bastion of Twilight and Blackwing Descent fairly regularly. And because of the accessible nature of normal raids in Cataclysm, everybody will be able to just get themselves fully geared up doing random heroics and then going straight into Tier 11, then straight into Tier 12. It has actually got a really nice progression curve to Cataclysm where you're going from like 200 eye level in your heroics, and it can be quite difficult to then jump, let's say, straight into Ulduar. And when Ulduar is out, no one's interested in Nax really anymore, whereas I do think Bastion of Twilight and Blackwing Descent stay relevant for a lot longer, but it's actually quite easy to get geared up. But the change I'm recommending is not actually just removing Titan Rune Dungeons and not doing them anymore, it would be to convert them into challenge modes. Now, if you've never done challenge modes, when they got introduced in Mr. Pandaria, they were absolutely amazing. They would reward a title, a mount, a full set of transmog armor, and on the basis in Cataclysm we're going to have transmog, it would be the perfect time to do it. They could quite easily attach a store mount that we haven't got in Classic to the achievement, and obviously transmog, I don't know, just pick a set of gear that looks really cool from a future expansion and slap it in as a reward for each class. It adds a lot of healthy competition, trying to beat people's times and being able to see the leaderboards in-game, and ultimately would keep all of the dungeon content relevant throughout the entire expansion, because it will naturally scale you down to the eye level of that dungeon. So let's say the item level of the dungeon is 3, 4, 6 item level, which is generally what drops from them. No matter what gear you're using, you will always be scaled down to 3, 4, 6. This means they haven't got to constantly make changes, add in like gamma, add in beta, alpha, all of that stuff throughout the expansion. They can just do it once, turn them all into challenge modes, put the rewards attached to them, you know, there, and then leave them there, and then just let them run their course for the rest of the expansion. And quite honestly, if you've never done challenge modes, trust me, you will enjoy them, because they are a really, really fun way. And a lot of people like speedrunning. Remember, you know, I know it's mainly raids, but these people that enjoy speedrunning raids would probably enjoy speedrunning dungeons to show off how quick they can physically get through it. And with all the cheesy tactics we find for everything nowadays, I think it'd be quite interesting. But in my humble opinion, they're the 5 things that I think need to be addressed or possibly get changes or amendments. Let me know in the comments what you think would need to be changed in Cataclysm Classic, and probably why I'm wrong, because I know you like doing that. You like telling me why I'm wrong and why Raid Finder was actually great, or I don't know, why Titan Rune dungeons are better than challenge modes, whatever. Once again, be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Again, definitely consider joining the other few hundred people that have already clicked join on the channel, because over the next few weeks, I am going to start ramping up on members only content, so you don't want to miss that. See you on the next one.